So today's is Sotah Daf Chav Tes, Sotah 29. We're going to start on the bottom of Chav Ches on the base that the Bryce had recorded a dispute between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Akiva had said, we learn out from the fact that it says nitma'a vinitma'a in the Torah that a sotah is prohibited if she doesn't drink her bitter waters, not only to her husband, also to the boel, the one she's accused of adultery with, and also to eat truma. So in that context, Rabbi Shmuel responds, we know that she's prohibited to marry a Kohen from a Kal V'chomer. If a Grusha was allowed to eat truma, it's prohibited to a Kohen. For sure, the sotah is not allowed to eat truma. For sure, she can't marry a Kohen. And then Gemara says, well, we don't understand. Rabbi Shmuel is responding about marrying a Kohen, but that's not what Rabbi Akiva was talking about. Rabbi Akiva was talking about eating truma. So that's where we'll pick it up on the bottom of 28b for Rabbi Shmuel. I'm a Rabbi Akiva truma. Rabbi Akiva said something about truma, and Rabbi Shmuel responded about the kahuna. It doesn't make any sense. Visu Rabbi Akiva kahuna minale. And furthermore, how does Rabbi Akiva himself, which Rabbi Shmuel assumed, how does Rabbi Akiva himself know that she can't marry a Kohen? And if you want to say, well, to marry a Kohen, Rabbi Akiva doesn't need a pasuk. Why? Top of Chav Tes Amud Aleph. Shari Asaba Safik Zona Kazona. Because a Zona is not allowed to marry a Kohen. A Zona is a woman who slept with a man she's not allowed to. So a Zona. So a sotah is a suffix zona. We're not sure if she's a zona. Rabbi Akiva is saying that a suffix zona is like an actual zona. And so therefore, we don't need a pasuk to tell us that she can't marry the Kohen, because since she's a suffix zona, since she might have been a zona, she can't marry a Kohen. Well, if that's the case, truma nami lo tibaikra. Then Rabbi Akiva should also not need a pasuk to tell us she can't eat the truma. Shari asaba suffix zona kazona. Zona also can't eat truma. So we should just say, a suffix zona is like a zona, and she can't eat the truma. Now, Rabbi Akiva arba kra'ik. According to Rabbi Akiva, there are 4 verses that tell us from the pasuk, and everything is needed. A pasuk is needed for each one of them. Chad l'bal, chad l'bal, chad l'kahuna, v'chad l'truma. According to Rabbi Akiva, there are 4 verses, and so therefore the 4 verses are learned out. Nitma'a, nitma'a, v'nitma'a. And so Rabbi Akiva is learning out from the extra vav and minitma to darshan that word twice. Rabbi Yishmael to us Rabbi Yishmael, who doesn't darshan the extra vav, he says there are 3 verses telling us that a sotah is prohibited. And Rabbi Yishmael is saying the 3rd one is for truma, and the kahuna, and Rabbi Yishmael derives that she can't marry a Kohen, Asya b'Kal V'chomer. That's learned out from a Kal V'chomer from the fact that she can't eat the truma. Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, mimayd itzrach kral truma ukahuna Asya b'Kal V'chomer. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, how does he know that we need a pasuk to tell us that she can't eat the truma and the kuna is derived from a Kal V'chomer? From that, how do we know that that's the way to go? Dilma ki itzrach l'kahuna. Maybe we need a pasuk to tell us she can't marry a Kohen. If the sotah can't marry a Kohen, utruma sharia, and actually she's allowed to eat the truma. Maybe that's the way to do it. So the Gemara says, no, we're going to say that the 3rd verse, the 3rd nitma'ah, has to be similar in parameters to the prohibition on the husband and the adulterer. Just like the husband and the adulterer, those are prohibitions that take place while she's alive. And truma is also a prohibition that will take place while she's still alive. That no matter what happens, if her husband divorces her and she hasn't drank the bitter water, she can no longer eat from the truma. Afuke kahuna, whereas the prohibition of marrying a Kohen, that by definition only takes place till achar misa, after he dies, because if he divorced her, she would be anyways prohibited, because a divorcee cannot marry a Kohen. So it's therefore a prohibition that takes place after his death. Rabbi Akiva who needs 4 psukim, he doesn't adopt this logic that it has to be similar in parameters to the husband and to the adulterer, that they both need to be alive, which they're both are alive. He doesn't say that. Or Inami Islay, or else Rabbi Akiva does say that, but he says we're not going to learn a Kal V'chomer. Why? Because Milsa da Asya B'Kal V'chomer Tarch V'Kasav Akra. We still need a fourth pasuk because sometimes, even though there can be something that's derived from a Kal V'chomer, the verse will go ahead and write it explicitly. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Gido Amar Rav, Davar sheyesh bo das l'shol ve'emo das l'shol mehai krai nafka. The Gemara says, we had seen from the Sotah that we could be lenient with respect to Tumah. That's a suffix, that's a doubt. You have to have the parameters of the Sotah. And the Sotah has two qualities that we learned about when to be stringent. One, the Sotah, we're strict about the Tumah of the Sotah. I mean, we say we have to be concerned that she committed adultery. If it was in the private circumstances, because a Sotah woman, Sotah takes place with just two people. And also, the other aspect of it is that the Sotah is a woman who could be asked. But if it's something in public or it's something that can't be asked, then we're going to say that we have to be strict about the Sotah, strict about Tumah. So now the Gemara cites Rav Gido in the name of Rav that actually we learn out this concept, Davar Sheish Bo Das L'Shal, which we say by the Sotah, that means we're strict. We learn it out from a different source. Rav Gido Amar Rav, Davar Sheish Bo Das L'Shal, something that you can ask about, we're strict about Tumah. Ve'em Bo Das L'Shal, but if you can't ask them, we're going to be lenient. Mehai krai nafka. We learn out from a different pasuk. What's the pasuk? That it says by the carbon shlamim, the meat that touches anything that's tamei cannot be eaten. This is obviously the case that we're talking about vadai tameu. There's something that touches something and it's tamei, you can't eat it. Vadai tamei hudu yochel. If it's certainly tamei, that's what you can't eat. Hasafik tamei v'safik tar. But if we're not sure if it's tamei or if we're not sure that it's tahor, you should be able to eat it. But ema seifa. But the last part of that verse tells us v'abasar kol tahor yochal basar, and the meat, anything that is tahor, you can eat the meat. Which means to say v'alei tahor hudi yochal basar. Hasafik tamei v'safik tar lo yochal. It means to say only if it's certainly tahor can you eat it. But if we're not sure if it's tahor, if it's safik tamei safik tahor, you cannot eat it. So from the first part of the verse, we say you only can eat it if it is certainly tamei. From the second part of the verse, we say you can only eat it if it's certainly tahor. So which is it? So we're talking about two different scenarios. If you have the ability to ask it, if it's a person, you say, did you touch this? Then we're going to be strict. But if we don't have ability to ask it, so then we're going to be lenient. So therefore, we see this concept from this pasuk. Is strict, is not from the Sotah, like we had said on Chav Ches, but rather it's from this pasuk of the carbon shlamim. So the Gemara says, we need this teaching of Rav Gido in the name of Rav, and we need this teaching of the Sotah. The Imi Rav, because if it was from the teaching of Rav Havamina, Bein Bershus Yachab Bein Bershus Rabim, Rav's teaching doesn't draw a distinction between the private domain and the public domain, whereas the Sotah does draw a distinction and said this only applies that we're strict in the private domain. So therefore, we need to have the case of the Sotah. And it's Jacham Migmar V'imi Sotah. And if we just had the case of the Sotah, Hava Amina Adika Das Nogeo Magia, I would say just like by the Sotah, that they're both parties involved, you can ask. It's not an inanimate object, a piece of meat with a human, it's two humans. And so therefore, if we just had the case of the Sotah, I would have thought you needed both. So therefore, we need both teachings to say, A, you just need one of them to be able to ask, and B, it needs to be in the private domain in order to be strict. Okay, so Now we come on to the next speech, which is challenging, and it's going to take us for the next 2 days and do the best we can. So we said that day Rabbi Akiva expounded in the base medrash that a kli cheres, let's say an oven, a pottery oven, an earth oven, that something that a sheretz fell into it makes the oven tamei just by being in it, and it makes the object that's in the oven will become a second degree tumah. So if there's bread in the oven, the bread will become a second degree tumah. Rabbi Akiva said that this bread can then make truma into a third degree level of tumah. So Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, when Rabbi Yeshua heard this, he said, "Oh, I wish Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai would have been alive," because he was worried that since there was no verse to tell us that a third degree, that there could be third degree tumah by truma, that the next generation would have made it tahor and not tamei. And we see from here that Rabbi Akiva is making it tamei, so Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai would have been so happy. So the Gemara asks, well, if there's no verse, why would Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai have said it's tamei? So Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav Minatora Einlo. Yeah, biblically speaking, there's no verse to tell us that the Minatora Einlo, that biblically speaking, there's no verse to tell us that the truma, that's a third degree truma, is tameya. But midin kal v'chomer yesha. But we could derive it from a logical argument. What's the logical argument? Matful yom. What's a tful yom? A tful yom is a person who's gone to the mikvah that day. Let's say he touched the sheretz. He's gone to the mikvah, but he has to wait till nightfall until he is completely tahor, until he can eat the truma. So this tful yom shem mutar b'chulin. So a tful yom, he's in this quasi status until nightfall. He's allowed to eat chulin, but if he touches the truma, he's going to posel the truma. He's going to disqualify the truma from being able to be eaten. So therefore, just like a tful yom is able to eat chulin, but yet he disqualifies the truma, kikar sheni she'pasel b'chulin, a loaf of bread, if it is capable in that oven of second degree tumah, if it was chulin, it's become disqualified. Eino din sheyas shlishi b'truma. For sure, it should be able to make truma into a third degree. So that's the argument. The argument is if it's tful yom, if he touches bread, it doesn't become tamei. But nevertheless, if he touches a truma, he disqualifies it. A loaf of bread, which can become tamei as a second degree tumah, for sure can make truma into a third degree. So that's the argument that Rabbi Yochanan was saying. So iko meifrach, but there was the concern. But the Gemara says, wait, we could break that kal v'chomer, because there's a difference between a tful yom and a second degree tumah. Why? Mal a tful yom shekain avatuma. Tful yom start off as a primary source of tumah. And so, like, for example, a tamei mace or a zav, they could be tful yoms, whereas the second degree tumah was never an avatuma. So therefore, how can you compare the two? Maybe that's why tful yom can make the truma pasul disqualified. So the Gemara says, Teisi mitful yom the sheretz. Well, no, we can learn that from a tful yom the sheretz, which was never somebody who became tful yom from a sheretz. He starts off as a first degree tumah, and he can also make the truma, and he can also make the truma pasul. So therefore, on top of 29b, we learn that from the kal v'chomer of the tful yom of sheretz, because that can make the truma pasul. And yet at the same time, we're going to say that even though it can make he's mutar v'chulin. So therefore, we can learn out the kal v'chomer to the loaf of bread. The Gemara says, yeah, but you can't learn it out because now it's tful yom the sheretz. She came b'mino avatumah. No, but the category of the person who's a tful yom of the sheretz, a person can become an avatumah. He can become a primary source of tumah, as opposed to this piece of bread. It never can become an avatumah. It can only become a rishon or a sheni for tumah. So it can only become a first degree or second degree tumah. So the Gemara says, well, still we could so therefore, we shouldn't be able to learn a Kal V'chomer from the Tvul Yom to the loaf of bread. The Gemara says, yeah, but we could push this off because we could say a Kli Cheres Yochiach. We can learn out from this oven, this earthenware oven, that even something which is not avatuma can make a loaf of bread into a can make a loaf of bread into a third degree tuma. Why? How do we know that? Because the kli cheres cannot become an avatuma, and nevertheless it can make the foods and the liquids that are in it tamei, and for sure it can disqualify the truma. So we see from here that the reasoning is not because there's something in this category that's an avatuma that could cause the truma to become disqualified, and so therefore we should learn from the kli cheres that the same idea that a second degree loaf of bread can make something tamei, even though it's not itself, even though it itself can become an avatuma. So the Gemara says, but you can't learn out anything from the kli cheres. Why? So we had tried to learn out the Kal V'chomer initially. We had tried to learn out from the Kal V'chomer from the Tvul Yom, but we said we can't learn out from the Tvul Yom because the Tvul Yom has in its category an avatuma. So the Gemara is saying let's learn out from the kli cheres, because even though it doesn't have in its category an avatuma, nevertheless it has the ability to make something tamei. It has the ability to make something tamei that falls in it. It can make something truma. It can make truma tamei. So the Gemara says, well, we can't learn out anything from the kli cheres. Why? Because mal kli cheres shekei mitame me'avira. The kli cheres has a stringency that if it just falls into it, it will make it tamei. Hold on one second. So the kli cheres has a stringency that if something just falls into it, it will become tamei from the avira, which is not found in any other circumstance. So therefore, you can't learn out a Kal V'chomer from the kli cheres. Well, the Gemara says, well, Tvul Yom yochiach. So let's go back to the Tvul Yom and derive something from the Tvul Yom. The Chozer Adin will rezekri says. So neither one is strong enough on their own to make the Kal V'chomer. So therefore, outside of Shava Shabam, but they both have a common denominator. What's a common denominator? Shemutarim b'chulin uposlim b'truma. That both of them. Okay, so here we have girsa issues. There's a little bit of question. What's the proper language to use here? So Rashi has the tzad shava sheben shemetamin uposlam b'truma. Rashi has the girsa that both of them that can become tamei and they're poslam b'truma. But if we go with the language of the Gemara, both of them they are called tamei, and nevertheless they can disqualify the truma. So for sure, kol shekain kikar sheni, for sure, a second degree loaf of bread, posel b'chulin, it can make something truma, which is, so for sure, a second degree loaf of bread, which is sheposel b'chulin, the posel b'truma, for sure it can make something that's truma disqualified. And so what would be the question that was asked on that Kal V'chomer from Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai? V'dor acher parech, and the next generation would ask, Malat tzad hashava b'hem sheyish ben tzad chamor, that they both have this stringency. You can't learn out this common denominator because they each both have a stringency. The stringency of the kli cheres is that it's metame me'aviro, and the stringency of the Tvul Yom is that it comes from something that could be an avatuma. Rabbi Yochanan, so therefore you can't compare them and learn out the Kal V'chomer. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai says tzad chamor lo parach, that the stringent side is not going to be a question upon us, because that last piece is a little challenging because there's major issues with the girsa, so it's a little bit challenging to explain. So we did the best we can. So Tanya Amar Rabbi Yossi. So now that we're talking about truma has the ability to become a third degree tuma, and then it stops. You can't have a fourth degree tuma by truma, but you can have a fourth degree tuma by kachim, by the sacred food of the base of mikvahs. So Rabbi Yossi says, "Minayin l'ravi b'kodesh apostle." How do we know that there could be a fourth level of tuma by kachim? And the apostle means that that's the fourth level and it stops. Tameh means it is actually has the ability to make another property also tameh. So the Gemara asks the question, how do we know that there could be a fourth level of Tumah by Kachim? Vidinu, and we're going to, perhaps we learn out from the Kavah Chomer. Just like Mechusar Kippurim. What's the Mechusar Kippurim? Mechusar Kippurim, there are four people who, even though they've gone to the mikvah, they can't go into the base of Mikdash until they bring a carbon the next day. The Zav, the Mitzvah, and the Oledis. So how do we know that a fourth degree level of Tumah by Kachim is Tameh? Vidinu, we're going to learn it from a logical argument. Ma Mechusar Kippurim, Shemutar B'Truma. Somebody who's missing that carbon, let's say the woman who gave birth, she hasn't brought the carbon on day 81 yet. Shemutar B'Truma. She's allowed to eat the truma before she brings her carbon, but possible kodesh. But yet, if she touches kachim, she'll make it, or she can't eat the kachim until she brings the sacrifice. So is shlishi, a third degree level of tuma, shepasul b'truma, who's not allowed to eat the truma, eno din who sheyas or avi b'kodesh, for sure he should be able to make something into it. For sure the truma he should be able to make the third degree level of Tuma, if it touches a kachim, it for sure should be able to make it possible. Eno din sheyaser vi b'kodesh. So that's the logical argument. If a mechusar kippurim cannot eat kachim, but he can eat truma, for sure the truma should be able to make the kachim possible. So the Gemara says, "Lamanu shlishi l'kodesh min haTorah revi mikav chomer," and we know that kachim can become a third degree level of tuma from the Torah, and Revi, that it can become Revi, we learn that out from a Kavah Chomer. Shlishi l'kodesh min haTorah. And how do we know that it can become a third degree level of Tumah from the Torah? That Kachim can become Tameh from the Torah, because we're going to learn out from the same pasuk which we just had, actually, ironically, on the previous Amud about the Shlamim. Because it says in the pasuk, "V'abasar asher yiga b'kol tamei lo yachol." The meat that touches anything that's tamei cannot be eaten. Milo askinan, aren't we talking about that the kachim touched the naga b'sheni? It touched a second degree level of tumah. V'amar rachmana lo yachol, and the Torah is telling us that it cannot be eaten. From the fact that it says b'kol tamei, we must be talking about that it's talked about a second degree tumah. That even though it's tamei, even though it's second degree tumah, it's still called tamei, because otherwise it wouldn't be called kol tamei. So we're talking about the food that's inside the kli sheni, and so therefore we're saying that the meat that touched this will make it a third degree tumah. And the pasuk is telling us that it cannot be eaten. So therefore we see from here, Revi mikav chomer keda'amr. So that's how we know that the kachim is a third degree level of tumah. And the fourth degree is learned out from a Kavah Chomer, from a Mechusar Kippurim, like we just said. So that's the teaching of Rabbi Yossi. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Tam baribi ein yodei ma'u. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't understand the reasoning behind Rabbi Yossi, how we can learn out from a Kavah Chomer, from a Mechusar Kippurim, that there could be a Revi by Kachim. Shari Chuvaso B'tzido, because the response to him is right next to him. Why can't we learn from food that touched a person who's a Tvul Yom? This should prove that we can't learn out of Kavah Chomer from Mechusar Kippurim, that somebody that we can't learn out from Mechusar Kippurim. Shapasol b'truma ve'ino seravi b'kodesh, because a Tvul Yom can make something, if he touches something that's truma, makes it disqualified, but yet it doesn't make a Revi b'kachim, and so therefore you can't learn that out from a Kavah Chomer, from a Tvul Yom. The Tanya Abba Shaul Omer, because Abba Shaul taught Tvul Yom. Now, what's the law of a Tvul Yom? Abba Shaul is teaching us this Tchilul Kodesh, that if it touches something, it makes something a Rishon, and then it is Latame Shnayim. And so if the Tvul Yom touched Kachim, then he's going to say it makes it, I have the ability to make it twice, meaning to say to make two levels of Tumah. That means to say it can make something into a Shlishi, V'lifso Echad, and then to make the fourth level Pasul. meaning to say it stops there. So since the Tful Yom is considered a Rishon, and if he touches Hektish, he makes that a second degree Tumah, and the Hektish can touch something else and make it a third degree Tumah, and that the third degree Tumah can also make something Pasul and stops there at the fourth degree Tumah. Rameir says, Metami Echad, Poso Echad. Rameir says it can make something into a second degree Tumah, which can make a third degree Tumah, and then it stops. Posel stops. The Chachamim Omrim, and the Chachamim say, Kashem, Sheposel, Ochle Truma, Mashke Truma, Kach Posel, Ochle Kodesh, Mashke Kodesh. Just like it can make something into a third degree Tumah, but there it stops. It's Posel, not Matame. So too, it is Posel, the Kodesh, and the liquids, and it makes them as well prohibited, but it doesn't let them go further. So therefore, the Gemara is challenging Rabbi Yossi, because if he is saying that anything that disqualifies Truma also disqualifies Kachim, like we learned from the Mechusar Kipporim, we should have learned the Kal V'chomer also to a case about food that touched the Tful Yom, that it should disqualify the Kachim by touching it. So therefore, we have a question on Rabbi Yossi. So I'm asking for Rav Papa, Rabbi Yossi, Karabanan Tzvirle. How do we know that Rabbi Yossi holds like the Rabbanan? Maybe Rabbi Yossi holds just like Abba Shol, who says that it has the ability only to go. It has the ability all the way to go to Kachim. And if Rabbi Yossi holds like Abba Shol, it's not going to be a challenge on him, because he learns a Kal V'chomer from Mechutzer Kippurim that makes something a Shlishi, can also make a Revi for Kachim. So the Gemara says no. If you want to say he holds ka Abba Shol Sfirle, if you were going to say he holds like Abba Shol, that Tvul Yom is considered basically a Sheni, and the Truma that touches it becomes a Shlishi, and it can make the Kachim into a Revi. You should have brought the principle of a Revi from Kachim, from food that came as a consequence of touching a Tful Yom, and not from a Chutzer Kippurim. And you could have said, the Tful Yom Gufe Mutar B'Chulin, Amras Ose Revi B'Kodesh. You could have said, if the Tful Yom, which is permitted in Chulin, can make a Revi B'Kodesh, that therefore Ochol Shlishi Abba Machmasheni the Sheni Gufei Asbechun Eno Din Shos Rabbi Kodesh. Okay, we'll have to review this tomorrow. We'll start a little bit earlier when we do the recording for tomorrow's stuff. So it'll help us cement it down. We'll have to stop here to daven. Shkoyach to everybody.